There are dreams where voices echo, where footsteps approach, where words are spoken clearly and remembered long after waking. And then there are others. Dreams where mouths move but no sound comes out, where entire scenes unfold in perfect clarity, faces, emotions, actions, yet the world itself is mute. No voices, no music, no noise, only silence. And what makes this unsettling is not the absence of sound, it's the absence of strangeness. Because inside these dreams, the silence doesn't feel wrong. You don't question it. You don't notice it. You simply exist within it, as if sound were never meant to be there at all. Only after waking does the realization arrive. The conversation had no voice. The scream had no sound. The world was alive, yet completely quiet. Silence in dreams is not rare, but it is deeply misunderstood. It doesn't announce itself. It hides behind familiarity. It disguises itself as normality. And when you begin to notice it, it raises a disturbing question about consciousness itself. If dreams are generated by the brain, why does the brain sometimes choose not to give them sound? Is silence a failure of memory, a limitation of imagination, or a deliberate feature of how the sleeping mind constructs reality? Tonight, we are not talking about peaceful dreams. We are talking about muted consciousness. Because when the mind removes sound from a dream, it is revealing something precise about attention, awareness, and how deeply perception depends on meaning, not sensation. And by the end of this journey, silence will no longer feel empty. It will feel intentional. Silent dreams are one of the most overlooked features of human dreaming, not because they are rare, but because they feel invisible while they are happening. When people recall dreams, they usually describe images, places, faces, movements, emotions. Sound is mentioned far less often, and when it is missing entirely, most dreamers don't realize it until after waking, when they mentally replay the scene and notice something uncanny. The dream had no audio track, no voices, no ambient noise, no footsteps, wind, or background hum, and yet the dream still made sense. This is what makes silent dreams so fascinating. They challenge a basic assumption we carry about perception: that sound is essential for reality to feel complete. In waking life, silence is noticeable. In dreams, it often isn't. The mind accepts a soundless world without resistance. From a phenomenological perspective, this tells us something crucial. Dreams are not built from sensory realism, but from meaning. The brain does not recreate the world as it is experienced when awake. Instead, it constructs just enough information to sustain a coherent narrative. If sound is not required to understand what is happening, the brain may simply omit it. Silent dreams appear across many contexts. They occur in mundane dreams, emotional dreams, and even intense nightmares. People report seeing arguments without hearing words, witnessing danger without noise, or communicating through pure understanding, knowing what was said without hearing it spoken. Importantly, this is not the same as deafness in dreams. In silent dreams, there is no awareness of lacking sound. There is no frustration, no attempt to listen. The dream world is not quiet. It is non-auditory. Why does this matter? Because it reveals how selectively the dreaming mind operates. During sleep, the brain is not trying to replicate reality in full resolution. It is prioritizing salience, what matters emotionally, symbolically, or cognitively. Vision often dominates because it carries spatial and narrative information. Sound, unless emotionally critical, becomes optional. Silent dreams are especially common in people who think visually rather than verbally, experience high cognitive load during waking life, or enter deeper, more immersive dream states. They are also reported more frequently in dreams that feel observational rather than interactive, where the dreamer watches events unfold instead of participating through dialogue. So the question is not, why are some dreams silent? The deeper question is, why does the brain sometimes decide that sound adds nothing to consciousness? To answer that, we have to move beyond description and into psychology, into how attention, language, emotion, and inner speech behave when the mind turns inward during sleep. Psychologically, silent dreams reveal something fundamental about how the mind prioritizes experience when external reality is shut off. In waking life, sound plays a critical role in orientation, communication, and threat detection. But in dreams, those functions are largely unnecessary. The dreamer is not required to react to the environment in real time. There is no need to locate danger, respond to voices, or decode speech for survival. As a result, the dreaming mind often strips perception down to what is psychologically sufficient, not sensorially complete. At the center of this process is attention. Dreams follow the same attentional rules as waking consciousness, but in a simplified form. Whatever the mind is focused on becomes vivid. Whatever is irrelevant fades or disappears entirely. If the emotional or narrative core of the dream does not depend on sound, the brain redirects resources elsewhere. Vision and emotion dominate. Audio is quietly dropped. Another key factor is inner speech. In waking consciousness, many people experience a constant internal monologue. In dreams, this inner voice behaves differently. Sometimes it transforms into audible dialogue. Other times it dissolves into pure semantic understanding, meaning without language. You don't hear words, you know what was said. From a psychological standpoint, this is not silence. It is compressed communication. The mind bypasses language and delivers meaning directly. This often occurs in dreams involving abstract concepts, emotional realizations, or symbolic interactions. A character doesn't need to speak for you to understand them. Their intention arrives instantly, without sound. Silent dreams are also linked to reduced self-monitoring. Sound in dreams often increases when the dreamer becomes more self-aware or socially engaged. Conversations, arguments, and spoken dialogue tend to appear in dreams where the ego is active, where the dreamer is negotiating identity, relationships, or conflict. In contrast, silent dreams frequently occur when the self becomes more observational, less verbal, and less defined. This is why silent dreams often feel cinematic. You are watching rather than participating. Present, but not embedded in dialogue. The psychological distance allows the dream to unfold like a visual narrative rather than an interactive exchange. Emotionally, silence can serve another function: containment. Highly emotional dreams sometimes mute sound to prevent overload. Fear, grief, awe, or tension may be intensified visually while audio is suppressed. The mind regulates intensity by limiting sensory channels. Silence becomes a stabilizer, not an absence. Importantly, this does not indicate emotional detachment or repression. On the contrary, silent dreams can be deeply emotional. The lack of sound often sharpens feeling, drawing attention inward rather than outward. In this sense, silence is not a failure of dreaming. It is a psychological strategy, a way for the mind to preserve meaning while conserving complexity. To fully understand why this strategy emerges so naturally during sleep, we now have to look beneath psychology, into the brain itself, and how auditory perception behaves during different stages of sleep. From a neuroscientific perspective, silent dreams are not mysterious gaps in perception. They are the direct result of how the sleeping brain selectively deactivates and reconfigures sensory systems. During sleep, especially in REM sleep, where most vivid dreaming occurs, the brain does not process sensory information evenly. Visual regions of the cortex, particularly the occipital lobe and visual association areas, remain highly active. This is why dreams are so image-rich. Faces, places, motion, and spatial layouts are generated with remarkable clarity. Auditory processing, however, behaves very differently. The primary auditory cortex, located in the temporal lobe, shows significantly reduced and inconsistent activation during REM sleep compared to visual regions. While it is not completely shut down, it is far less reliably engaged. The brain is capable of generating sound, but it often chooses not to, unless sound is crucial to the dream's emotional or narrative structure. This creates an important asymmetry. The brain favors sight over sound when simulating reality. One reason lies in how sensory information is gated during sleep. The thalamus, often described as the brain's sensory relay station, partially blocks external auditory input to protect sleep. This suppression doesn't just reduce real-world noise, it also dampens the internal auditory feedback loops that would normally generate sound imagery. In contrast, visual imagery relies more heavily on memory and association networks than on immediate sensory feedback. These networks remain highly active during REM sleep, making vision easier to simulate than sound. Neurochemistry also plays a role. As discussed earlier, REM sleep is dominated by acetylcholine, which enhances cortical activation and imagery. But neurotransmitters like norepinephrine and serotonin, which help regulate attention, sequencing, and linguistic structure, are markedly reduced. These chemicals are essential for organizing speech, dialogue, and auditory continuity. Without them, the brain shifts toward nonverbal cognition. Meaning is processed, emotions are felt, and scenes unfold, but language and sound become fragmented or unnecessary. The brain communicates internally through patterns, associations, and emotional signals rather than auditory representations. There is also evidence that silent dreams reflect network efficiency. The brain is metabolically conservative during sleep. It allocates resources where they matter most. If a dream scenario does not require sound to be understood, the auditory simulation is skipped. This is not an error, it is optimization. Interestingly, when sound does appear in dreams, it is often linked to emotionally charged events, sudden awakenings, external noises bleeding into the dream, or increased frontal lobe activation, as seen in lucid dreaming. This suggests that silence is the default state, and sound is the exception. In essence, the sleeping brain constructs reality like a minimalist architect. It builds only what consciousness needs to remain coherent, and very often, it decides that silence is enough. To see how this plays out beyond theory, in laboratories, experiments, and real documented experiences, we need to look at what sleep science and dream research have actually observed in practice. Although silent dreams rarely attract popular attention, they appear consistently across decades of scientific dream research, often hiding in plain sight within data that focuses more on imagery than sound. One of the earliest clues comes from large-scale dream content analyses conducted in the mid-20th century. When researchers asked participants to record dreams in detail, they noticed a striking pattern. Visual elements were described far more frequently than auditory ones. Sound was not absent, but it was optional. Many dreams were reported with rich narrative coherence despite containing no remembered dialogue or noise at all. This observation was later reinforced by the Hall van de Castle dream coding system, one of the most widely used frameworks in dream research. When thousands of dream reports were coded and analyzed, visual actions, settings, and emotions dominated. Verbal exchanges and explicit sounds appeared far less often than expected, given how central they are to waking life. Researchers didn't interpret this as memory failure. Instead, they concluded something more revealing. Dreams often operate on nonverbal cognition. Modern sleep lab studies support this idea. In controlled REM awakenings, where participants are woken immediately after dreaming, subjects frequently report knowing what happened without recalling any sound. When asked directly whether voices or noises were present, many respond with uncertainty, followed by realization, no, it was silent, but it didn't feel silent. This distinction is critical. In one set of experiments examining auditory imagery during REM sleep, neuroscientists found that auditory cortex activation was highly variable. Some dreams contained vivid sounds. Others showed minimal auditory engagement despite strong emotional and visual intensity. The determining factor was not realism, but relevance. When sound carried emotional weight, it appeared. When it didn't, it vanished. Clinical observations add another layer. Patients who lose hearing later in life often report that dreams gradually become quieter over time, not immediately, but progressively. Visual dreaming remains intact, meaning remains intact. Sound fades slowly, suggesting that auditory dreaming depends heavily on recent waking life reinforcement, whereas visual dreaming is more deeply embedded in long-term memory networks. There are also documented cases involving meditative practitioners and individuals trained in visualization. These subjects frequently report dreams that resemble silent films, highly structured, symbolic, emotionally rich, and almost entirely non-auditory. Researchers propose that extensive inward attention reduces reliance on verbal and auditory processing even during sleep. Perhaps most revealing are cases involving lucid dreamers. Lucid dream journals often note that sound increases after lucidity begins. Before awareness, the dream may be silent. Once the dreamer realizes they are dreaming, dialogue, music, or ambient noise suddenly emerges. This shift suggests that sound in dreams may be linked to executive awareness, not baseline consciousness. Across all these studies and cases, one conclusion quietly repeats itself. Sound is not fundamental to dreaming. Meaning is. The brain does not ask, "Is this realistic?" It asks, "Is this sufficient?" And very often, silence is sufficient. Which brings us to the final question. Not about dreams, but about us. What does it say about human consciousness? That understanding can exist without sound? Silent dreams leave us with a subtle but profound realization. Consciousness does not require sound to exist. In waking life, silence often feels empty. It suggests absence, distance, or loss. But in dreams, silence feels complete, functional, whole. The mind does not experience it as missing something, because dreaming consciousness is not built from sensation, but from understanding. When the brain removes sound from a dream, it is not failing to simulate reality. It is revealing what reality is made of at its core. Meaning comes first. Perception follows. Silent dreams show us that awareness can unfold without language, without noise, without external confirmation. Thoughts arrive without words. Emotions surface without voices. Events make sense without ever being heard. This is not primitive consciousness. It is compressed consciousness, stripped to its essentials. In that sense, silent dreams may be closer to the raw structure of awareness than waking life ever is. They remind us that the mind is not a recorder of the world. It is an editor. It decides what matters. It decides what can be removed. And it decides sometimes that sound is unnecessary. Perhaps this is why silent dreams feel so strange only after we wake. In the dream, there is no loss, only coherence, only presence, only a quiet certainty that understanding does not need a voice. And maybe that is the deeper message hidden in their silence. That beneath all language, beneath all noise, beneath all narration, consciousness itself is already speaking,